Hoi hoi. So why does a large portion of the autistic community advocate for positive autistic identity? Because we have to. I have this experience as being the parent of 4 autistic children and remaining suspended in a doom and gloom narrative where I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. I didn't know how to spend my time with my children. I was completely disconnected from them and my intuition as their mother. And I constantly felt overwhelmed with the demands, the energetic demands and pressure that I put on myself as the result of the information from professionals, therapists, services that are in alignment with the pathology model, the medical model of autism. So I always felt I was never doing enough. I felt guilty if I didn't make my child sit at the table and eat. I felt guilty if she wasn't using utensils to eat. I felt I was failing my children if they weren't meeting the same developmental milestones and working along the same developmental guidelines as their non-autistic peers. And that's interesting to me now, because my experience was that the very same practitioners who like to remind the autistic community that work towards work in alignment with autism acceptance and the neurodiversity movement like to remind us regularly that it's a disorder. Remember, it's a disorder. You people don't speak for my child who's nonverbal or who's 10 and in nappies, or, I hear a whole range of things, and I totally understand. I totally get it, because I am the parent of children who are all over the spectrum, and I relate to those experiences. And yes, we know it's classified as a disorder. That's pretty difficult to forget when you're a person who's autistic and everything you read and see and hear is around the deficit-based approach to autism. It's challenging to be trying to work in service to empower families and empower actual autistic people to help people to feel good about who they are, because that is what the autistic community strives for. We want to support families to know and understand themselves and their children. We want to help parents to connect with their children. We want to give different perspectives, autistic, informed perspectives based on lived experience that will often move away from some of the research that families of newly diagnosed children will be exposed to. Now, I'm not saying that everything that is studied and researched and written out there is wrong, but there is a lot of questionable information, and it's certainly problematic when autistic people have a voice, try to have a voice, and say, hey, can we give you a different perspective on that? Can we actually tell you why we do this, or why we engage in this behaviour, or, why we think like this, or what we're actually thinking when we do this? When we do that, we do it to inform people about why, in order for them to connect with their children, to understand them, to be able to work with them. And so when non-autistic practitioners come along and say, no, that's not right, or shut down people in the autistic community by saying, yeah, but you suffer from rigid thinking, black and white thinking. You have trouble taking the perspectives of others on board, or you have no insight into yourself, or you drive a car and you're intelligent and highly self-aware. You have a university degree, so you're not autistic. It's so insulting. It's so demeaning. It's oppressing. It's degrading. It's dismissive. And it is so damaging. The first thing people know when they hear the word autism is disorder. Autism is considered a tragedy in mainstream circles. And I have to question what good comes of being consistently reminded that it's a disorder. There is a movement of people on the autism spectrum that are offering insight and experience, connection, community, collaboration, and they're being refused. And parents are saying, you're not like my child, you're not really autistic, look at all the things you can do. And here's a bit of a gripe I have with that. If a parent does not believe that their child has the potential to turn out like someone like me or others in the autistic community who have these rich, positive autistic identities, who have these lives where they're independent and they're self-sufficient and they're doing all these wonderful things. If a parent does not believe in their child's potential to turn out like that, then why are we investing so much time and energy into early intervention, into therapies and services? And it just makes no sense to me. My concern for the initiation that families go through when their children are diagnosed is that they're stripped of hope. And sometimes they're given a little bit of hope, but it's never about actualising the potential or actualising or accepting or seeing their child as incredibly wonderful and complete and whole as an autistic child or an autistic person. It's always about the potential for them to be normal or non-autistic. There is hope. The hope is that if you work hard enough, they'll be indistinguishable from their peers. That sounds like a sickness to me. And you know, even before I knew I was autistic, when I was working with families, the amount of educators, when I would ask them, when working with them and parents and a child in an early education setting, when I would ask these educators, what do you want for this child? The number one most common answer was, I want them to fit in, I want them to be like everyone else. I'm not even kidding. And I understand that to a degree. We don't want our children to suffer. But how are we, as the elders of society, going about changing the world so that when children aren't like everybody else, they don't have to suffer? What are we doing to combat that? We're feeding it. We're basically saying, autism's not okay. Let's see what we can do to normalise these children so that they don't have to suffer. Why aren't we saying, let's see what we can do to educate the world about the beauty, the diversity, the richness, the fullness, the completeness and the wholeness of autism, so that when children aren't like everyone else, they don't suffer. They celebrate who they are. They're okay with being autistic. I understand it's a journey and there's a process to get there. My wish is for anybody to feel whole and complete, not just autistic people. People with any kind of diagnoses or labels or identities. And I see that the world is changing to work toward that. But I think it's really important to look at our motivations and our intentions behind the therapies and the services and the approaches that we choose for ourselves and for our children. Because what message are we sending to them? How do we think our children feel when they hear that they have a disorder? How do we think their sense of self is impacted when we visit professionals who we have open conversations with in the presence of our children about them being disordered? You know, we've had many professionals involved with our children, and I know off the top of my head all of the really fantastic people and exactly why they were fantastic. One of them absolutely built me up as a parent, you know, encouraged me by saying things like, "You are so in tune with your child, Kristy." And that might sound like nothing to others, but that meant everything to me. And I'll never forget those words from Sam and the constant encouragement. And we have a therapist now who listens to what I want for my child, and she doesn't argue it, you know, and I respect her experience and her qualifications, but at the end of the day, I'm the parent of my child. I'm also an autistic person, and there are certain therapies I won't accept because in our family we don't work toward normalisation. We work toward actualisation, meeting the best parts of my child. So, you know, if your intuitive sense as a parent, a carer, an ally, a professional, an autistic person, whoever you are, if your gut tells you something's not right or questions, why are we doing this? Do we really need to do this? If you hear a practitioner say something that you don't feel sits right with you, then it's because it just doesn't sit right with you, or it's not right for you or your child, or those services aren't for you, and that's okay. We take information from research, from practitioners, from therapist services, whatever, and we take what is helpful and useful. But the most important thing is that we are empowered to make decisions based on how well tuned in we are to our children. Because no matter what their diagnosis or identity or label is, they are still our children and we still know them. Even if we're having trouble connecting, we still know our children. We still know ourselves. And if we don't feel we know our children, we take the time to observe, to engage. Anyway, until next time, I hope you're all well.